to play the game of mapping it into something as abstract as the Boolean algebra. So let's go on a little bit here. I'm going to read from him. We see that in the first ethical system, plus is taken as the sign of confrontation and dot is the sign of compromise. In the second ethical system, the opposite is true. Plus is the sign of compromise, dot is the sign of confrontation. Axioms 1 and 2 reflect the specific interaction between good and evil. Axioms 3 and 4 reflect the assumption that by itself, good does not turn into evil, neither does evil turn into good. Axiom 5 uses one of 4 possible equations of formal implication. That was the 0 implies 0 is 1. Evil implies evil, aware of evil is good. We have to define 3 others. Evil, aware of the good is good. Whoops, did I say that backwards? Yes, excuse me. I better confront you with this. The implication when the 2 are different is going to be that B implies A is A being aware of B. Feels a little backward if you're used to going from the A to the B when you're doing A implies B. But the A to the B, A being aware of B, is B implies A. And then you can see that this does make certain sense. This is good being aware of evil is good. Good being aware of good is good, and evil being aware of the good remains evil. And you can check that that's correct as far as implication is concerned in the Boolean algebra. So he understood that he could take the locus of awareness in terms of implication, and that it isn't wrong. And for him, it felt right enough to incorporate that fully into his system. So A to the B means A is aware of B. That's notation for it, but it means that it is represented by B implies A, which is not B or A. At this point, if you wanted to go further, you would have to play with the Boolean algebra to understand how it's working. But he also, in his languaging, uses diagrams like these for the awareness patterns. So this fellow A is aware of A being aware of the negation of B or B. All right. So this is the structure, as he says, of an individual, A, who doubts the correctness of his image of his partner, B. And he can make more and more complex statements, like this is a dandy example. I won't read the algebra to you, but you see he reads it out, and he goes back and forth between the actual language and what gets compressed into the Boolean language. In the actual language, A and B are in conflict. Both of them reflect this fact correctly, and both have incorrect images of each other and of themselves. A sees his partner seeing A, but A himself sees the negation of A. So he believes his partner is wrong. B sees his partner seeing the negation of B, and B himself sees the negation of B. So he thinks his partner has a correct image of him. You can make very complex linguistic statements which can be compressed into Boolean statements, and then the Boolean algebra is actually a very easy algebra to analyze or parse and work out the values in terms of zeros and ones. And so he charts this and looks at a lot of the different language involving the 2 ethical systems and compares them by using this method. So I hope this gives you a bit of a flavor of it. Here are some of his statements that come out of his analysis or come out of his speaking to himself through that analysis about the nature of the systems. And I think the book is really worth a lot of thought because he has given a lot of thought both to it at the qualitative and usual language level and also in his own interaction with the system that he invented. So I'm just going to read a couple of these and we can think about them. And you can look at more of this if you're interested by getting his books. He said, therefore, prohibition of evil leads to the morality of the first ethical system, and declaration of good leads to the morality of the second ethical system. He also says, in the second part of a certain chapter, we analyze the peculiarities of functioning of a governmental system, which has the second ethical system as its basis. So that's the Soviet system. The life of such a system has two phases, the heroic and the Philistine. In the first, the heroic phase, the dominant role is played by sacrificial individuals of the second system. This individual tends towards sacrificial conflict with other individuals. The life of the society where such an individual is dominant becomes a permanent civil war of everyone against everybody. The government has to suppress this heroic element. Stalin's terror may be considered as a fight against this element. The main strategy in this fight was to destroy the heroic man of the second ethical system. Facts supporting this idea are given in the chapter. As a result of mass terror, the proud man of the second ethical system was destroyed and remained only in the system of propaganda abstractly. And it seems to me that we do see this very theme now in the relationship between the possibly heroic role in the Ukraine and the suppression role on the part of Russia. And perhaps a closer look at Lefebvre will help in understanding much of this. But I am personally suspicious of using it only in the mathematical sense. I think that the value here may be in really looking at the whole and then seeing how his mathematics may illuminate certain parts of it. He has conclusions of a general kind about the system, such as feeling guilty is more characteristic of an individual in the first system than in the second. Simultaneous appearance of feeling guilty and condemnation is a necessary condition for transformation of evil into good in the first. In the second system, only one of them is sufficient, feeling guilty or condemnation. Absence of doubts prevents the possibility of the transformation of evil into good in the first system, and does not prevent this in the second system. If an individual doubts the correctness of his image of himself and has a bad intention, then in the first system, he always feels guilty, but not always in the second. If an individual does not have any doubts, then in the first ethical system, he feels guilty sometimes, but never in the second. And these statements are all supported by the structure of the algebra and the relationship between the two systems given by that abstract framework. So he does quite deeply go back and forth between thinking about the systems as they are and seeing how they are related to his formalisms. So there are many questions. Lefebvre's insight about the structural relations of the two ethical systems via the Boolean switch of and and or is certainly of great interest. Where can we go with this insight towards deeper understanding of events, history, even deeper understanding of Boolean algebra, perhaps? For those who wish to work with the Boolean algebra and its relation with the ethical statements, I do recommend learning the laws of form version of the Boolean algebra. It just makes it very smooth to work with the Boolean algebra and move around in it so that it makes it easier to read him or to work with it. And all of this work, it should be mentioned, is embedded in wider algebraic structures for working with reflexive systems, some of which are Lefebvre's own inventions. So that's my summary, and I thank you.
That was great. Right.
So in this whole logic, there is a one fault, because each system thinks that they are good and the opposite system is bad.
Yes,
Okay?
yes.
And when you start, looking from this side, then every war ends in some kind of peace. That means that the good guys admit that bad guys are not that bad, and vice versa, huh?
Uh-huh.
So therefore, something is missing in this Lefebvre thinking. Reality a little bit more contrived, unfortunately. But I mean,
Well,
that's
that may be right. I mean, we're looking at someone who has created a simplification in which he can work in this way.
I give
And
you
the
even
question
more.
is,
I
go
give
on.
you an example from just current events. Okay, before this war with Ukraine started, Putin gave a 1 hour, more than 1 hour speech. Okay, this speech was not translated at all in the Western media. All news outlets have squeezed it to 2 sentences from 1 hour talk. And then they portrayed Putin as a complete evil, okay? Now, Putin portrays West as a complete evil because he says that he was, his mouth was shut up and he was not having a chance to explain his point of view. Then who is right? I mean, since I am from Ukraine and I know very, very well who they are, okay, I can talk for hours about this, which I will not. Okay,
so there's the entire subtlety of the context, and one's feeling is that you couldn't possibly take the subtlety and complexity of the context and just turn it into 0 and 1.
Exactly.
But he had at least the bravery to give that a try, and he's very sensitive to the whole context as well. So he's worth reading.
Here is the book by Lefebvre. 1973.
Yes.
So
I'm sorry, it's not 1973. It costs 41 kopecks, which is 41 cents. Okay.
Yes.
Have you ever seen in the West a book which would cost 41 cents? So,
not recently.
No,
I remember when gasoline was 37 cents a gallon.
I brought these books for a purpose because I was still a very young boy when I got interested in this book, and I carried it all the way to United States and through all this year. This is 1973, circa, original. Okay, and in fact, it was the first book of this guy. He was not sure of himself whether he is going to continue or not. Then he got more prominent and so on and so forth. But it was very interesting for me to read this, but I didn't know where it belongs. But it captivated my attention. So the question is, you as usual, you formulated things extremely sharply, clearly. And now the question is how to make some correction into, by the way, not Lefebvre, but Lefebvre. In Russian, it's Lefebvre, not Lefebvre. It's a translation.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
Yeah. It's nobody's fault. It's just like Mike Holodenko is, they screwed it up as well. But what I'm saying is that, it would be interesting to add this extra element because in each country, in Russia and in the United States, there is this institute of this war games, game theory, and so on and so forth, how one maybe can include all this into this. So
I have 2 questions. I have 2 questions. One for Pavel. Would you, from your perspective, completely agree with Lefebvre, or in what percentage that you think it is true, or in what percentage people, I mean, younger people, older people, are they functioning in which system? Another question for Lou is the second system have some kind of universality? I mean, for example, Islamic ideology, Islam terrorist system. Which one are they using? So one for Pavel, one for Lou.
Jason, it's a very good question. My vision is that these systems are abstract systems, and we cannot say that, okay, a second system is only for, I don't know, for Russia, for the Soviet Union, for socialist society, or for what? As well as the first system is not just for the West, for Europe, for the United States. They are present in any political or social environment. It's an abstraction, actually. Yeah. So I'm not ready to answer directly to your question. Who is doing what, following what system? Which particular people in Russia are following the first system and which the second one?
Then they could switch sides too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
May I interrupt? There is actually, since we brought up George Spencer Brown, he hung out with psychoanalysts, and one of them gave the solution, and she called it the dilemma of the good and evil breast. And so this thinking in a binary of good and evil, in this view, is the primitive thinking of a baby that just came out of the womb, like the first 6 months. And then is confronted with what he calls the good breast and the evil breast, and which ones to pick. And the dilemma is resolved by realizing they belong to the same body. And at that moment, the baby is switching gestalts. Dus before it was in particles that are all separate, and then it does the gestalt of bringing them together. And so I think we're literally struggling with codifying that transition at a much more global scale than in psychoanalysis or in cybernetics, because I think it is very much present in cybernetics, this realization of the gestalt switch between all these different models. For instance, if I may ask, Lou, you present this model, but I don't know what you think, because you present this model, but then you add some comments.
Right. I don't know what I think. You see, I feel quite comfortable working with the notion of distinction, the notion of switching gestalt, the notion of Boolean algebra, and all of that. But I don't feel that. I feel like this system surely oversimplifies everything, and yet on the other hand, it is indicating an important pivot, right? So, so I don't know yet what I think until I understand much more about the history and the actual politics and what goes on. And this is true not necessarily with Soviet or Russian history and our history, but what goes on politically in general is what this is speaking to. Those two systems are roughly trying to be moral in the usual sense, and on the other hand, allowing the ends to justify the means in the other system. And we see this switching back and forth between those two kinds of ethics in all sorts of situations.
But what I found interesting was that you called the second ethics Machiavellian, if I heard you use that word correctly. Well, I can see the second system also as the adult in the room who says it's oversimplified to call it good and evil. But then I cannot use that Boolean algebra anymore because I'm introducing a third box.
Well, you may wish to go into a third or intermediate states. Lefebvre actually did that as well. He tried using a generalized Boolean algebra that had values between 0 and 1, and he was quite enamored of such things and continued his analysis in that way. But even when you do that, even when you go to multiple valued logics, you're still ignoring enormous amounts of contextual material in compressing into the mathematical model.
In this case, is game theory, okay, and Lefebvre theory can be combined and making something out of both? So far, Lefebvre was staying in the class by himself without trying to reconnect his results with that of game theory. Now, game theory seemingly was already used by some war strategists to get something out of it. But I don't know any real example when it really worked, let alone Lefebvre theory. Okay, so the question is that mathematically speaking, it's all fine. But when it comes to reality, is there one example where it works?